The pine sap still clung to my fingertips when she came stomping up the gravel path like she owned every inch of Tennessee. Eileen Casterbridge, president of the Ashmill Ridge HOA, self-proclaimed guardian of shrub heights and mailbox colors. She didn't knock. She never did. Instead, she shoved the cabin door wide open with the heel of her boot, sending a gust of pollen and indignation into the room. "You're trespassing," she barked. I didn't look up right away, just folded the faded trail map I'd been re-inking some old habits you don't shake. The laminated corner cracked as I aligned it on the table. The radio crackled faint static in the background, ever faithful, even if no one cared to listen anymore. "This is private HOA property," she snapped. "We've warned you before, Mr. York." She didn't say Reynold, always Mr. York. She thought it sounded more official. I glanced out the window. Two residents, Darla Givens and her nephew Drew, I think, were peeking from behind the rosemary hedge by Lot 17. Their silhouettes hovered uncertainly like spectators at a low-stakes crime scene. Outside, the sign lay splintered under Eileen's boot heel. Private property. Emergency access. I'd carved it back in 2010 after a landslide. She hadn't even noticed it when she stepped on it. "You're violating 5 different property codes," Eileen continued, voice rising. "Trespassing, illegal occupancy, non-compliance with updated zoning." Her voice buzzed like a trapped wasp. I remained seated, pen still in hand. I wrote the time in the corner of the map, 4:52 p.m., and underlined it twice. Then I looked at her, calmly. "You planning to fix that sign?" I asked, nodding toward her boot. She hesitated. Just a flicker. Then she pulled out her phone and tapped 3 digits, loudly, like she expected the mountains to echo back applause. Line 11. "What's your emergency?" she announced, mocking the voice she assumed she'd hear. But the line buzzed. Once. Twice. Silence. She frowned. Hit redial. Nothing. "You people always say you're prepared, and now no one's answering. Doesn't your system work?" Her tone dripped with satisfaction like she'd finally caught me in a lie. I let the silence linger a moment longer, then I reached under the desk, flipped a switch, and the old transmitter on the shelf lit up. "Channel 31.9, I said. A faint hiss filled the air, steady and soft. Eileen blinked. "What is that ham radio? Is that even legal?" I adjusted the mic and spoke low. "Base to Ridge relay. Confirm perimeter check quadrant 3. 1 active. Standing by." She crossed her arms. "Nobody's going to hear you. This place is abandoned. Obsolete." I looked her straight in the eye. "Only when we root through people who respect the system." That's when the hiss changed. Static gave way to something softer, a shifting signal, distant but deliberate. A click, then 3 sharp beeps, then silence. But I knew someone was listening. Not a computer, not an operator, a person. Still out there like me, remembering how things were built before boards and bylaws took the place of common sense. Eileen didn't say another word, just huffed and turned her shoulder, brushing the doorframe hard enough to rattle the rusted hinges. I let her go. No sense in stopping a storm that's already blown through. Outside, the broken sign caught the late afternoon light. One piece still leaned against the post, its letters scratched but legible. Private property, emergency access. Some things don't get read until they're broken. The fax was waiting when I stepped into the office, curling slightly at the edges the way thermal paper does when it's been sitting too long. It had no header, no return number, just one line at the top. Subject Reynold York. Mental fitness and emergency access protocol violations. Below that came a list of allegations typed with the formality of someone who knew exactly how to sound official without ever signing their name. Misuse of emergency frequencies, breach of jurisdictional boundaries, evidence of delusional behavior and erratic conduct. I read it twice, slowly, then turned it over as if I might find a signature on the back. Nothing. The internal affairs clerk, no older than 25, stood with both hands clasped behind his back like he was trying to keep them from shaking. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "They asked for a review. Non-disciplinary. Just protocol." "Who's they?" I asked, already knowing. He didn't answer, just motioned to the small table in the corner and gestured toward a folded manila file. It looked too slim to hold a case, more like a warning. We sat. I skimmed the contents. A printed version of the fax. A clipped article from the HOA newsletter, something about revitalizing land use for modern efficiency. And a newly issued map. That's what made me pause. 5 years ago, I'd mounted the original emergency access overlay to the corridor outside, color-coded, laminated, and signed off by the county. It had the trails marked, the old waterline grids, even 2 helipad zones that hadn't been used since the 90s. I'd used a Sharpie to add a handwritten arrow in case of mudslide, gate B north. This new map was glossy, sleek, HOA stamped in the corner. It showed the same acreage, but half the paths were gone. No mention of gate B. The cabin labeled non-operational shed. The overlay was absent entirely, like the county had never even touched this land. They replaced the original, I asked. The clerk nodded. Last week. Said the old one was out of date. It wasn't just a replacement, it was a rewrite. Not just of paper, but of jurisdiction of memory. I stared at the page in front of me, feeling something tighten, not in anger, but in realization. This wasn't about my presence at the cabin anymore. It was about erasing the record that I'd ever had a role there at all. Did you log me as non-essential personnel? I asked, eyes still on the map. The clerk hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above breath, they asked us to. I didn't. We sat in silence a long moment, interrupted only by the hum of the fluorescent light and the soft, rhythmic whir of a ceiling fan. Through the window, pollen drifted like pale gold ash, catching sunlight that didn't reach the corners of the room. When I stood to leave, he handed me the fax folded twice. "For your records," he said. I didn't respond. Just slid it into my coat pocket and stepped out into the morning air. That evening, I drove home with the windows halfway down. The road from Carson twisted past the edge of the preserve where the fence line blurred between HOA and county land. Eileen's kingdom drawn in legalese and chain link. The cabin light was off when I returned. I sat in the truck for a while, letting the radio scan static, stopping at fragments of weather alerts and late-night preaching. At some point, I dozed off. A buzz woke me. Not the radio, my phone. A message from a blocked number. Check the toolbox Byron left behind. The keys still there. No signature, just like the fax. I stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my boots, and opened the shed door behind the cabin. Dust, thick as memory, coated everything. Byron's old tools were still on the pegboard, one missing one, rusted one bent from the time we pried open the second floodgate. The toolbox sat beneath. Red metal dented at the corners. I opened it. Inside, wrapped in a cloth that smelled faintly of grease and cedar, was a key I hadn't seen in over a decade. Flat. Brass. Engraved Gate B. North. The old shack off Mulligan's Bend still smelled like a cross between burnt dust and wet hay. 20 years had passed since the last formal dispatch came through its walls, but it felt like time had only paused, not stopped. Wires hung like sleepy snakes from the rafters, and the relay box on the far wall blinked faintly. Green faint, but alive. Byron Meeks stood by the window, one hand resting on the sill, eyes narrowed against the dying light. He hadn't changed. Still wore those faded utility pants with one cuff always tucked into his boot. Still had the same rough beard that turned entirely white sometime after his second bypass. "You drove the long way," he said without turning. "Didn't want to stir the hens through Ashmill Ridge," I replied. He snorted. "Smart." He motioned toward the center table. On it sat a folded mission map, the edges softened from years in a pocket. Wrapped inside was a brass key, flat scuffed and heavy with memory. I picked it up, ran my thumb across the engraving. Gate B. North. You kept it, I said. Didn't trust the county to archive it properly, Byron replied. Didn't trust the county, period. I looked around the shack. Same old stove, same half-busted ceiling fan, even the coffee tin with a note taped to it. If it hisses, it's still good. You think this still works? I asked, nodding toward the relay. He pulled a lever behind the desk. The backup generator kicked on with a reluctant rumble. A light blinked on the main console. Channel 31.9 buzzed like a bee caught in a jar. Still working, he said almost to himself. That's your edge. Before I could answer, the front door creaked. A figure stepped in, lean wiry ball cap pulled low. Didn't know you'd have company, Rue Silaire, said voice low, but firm. He nodded toward me, then toward Byron. I saw your truck. Brought this. He held out a folded printout. The HOA letterhead was hard to miss. I unfolded it. Notice of non-compliance. Property code violation 4.2.13. Failure to landscape per zone. 3 requirements. Daily, fine $150 until rectified. Rue sighed. I live 3 lots west of Eileen. She's got someone reporting on all of us. Dandelions count as invasive flora now. Sounds about right, I murmured. She wants to bury you, Byron said flatly. Under paper, under silence, under forms that don't mean anything out here. I looked back at the key. She's got the town in her pocket, I said. The council, the planning board, but not the system Byron cut in. Not the net, not this relay, and not me. There was an envelope tucked in the drawer of the relay desk. Byron pulled it out without ceremony. Figured you'd want this. I unfolded the sheet, dated May 2014. Authorization Perimeter Access, Emergency Route Gate B, Reynold, York. Signed Eileen Casterbridge, HOA, President. I stared at it for a long moment. The signature was unmistakable, her looping I, the proud C. She hadn't even changed her ink since then. She signed this, I said aloud. And now she's pretending the gate doesn't exist, Byron said. Rue shifted his weight. What are you planning to do? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the console, ran my hand along the worn edge of the speaker and clicked the mic on for a second. Static hissed, then cleared. I'm thinking about overriding the county broadcast, I said, letting the real map speak for itself. Byron leaned back. Then they'll finally hear you. Outside, a whippoorwill called once, then again. The sound echoed down the hills like a question you didn't want answered. The shack hummed around us, not loud, but steady, like something waiting for a command. The county legal archive was 3 floors underground, buried beneath a courthouse that hadn't seen fresh paint since before I was born. Everything smelled like old receipts and forgotten arguments. The walls were lined with fireproof cabinets and boxes stacked like tombstones row after row, labeled in fading Sharpie. Franklin Oak sat across from me, sleeves rolled tie, slightly crooked like he never got around to finishing the knot. The only light came from the narrow window slit high on the concrete wall where afternoon sun tried and failed to reach us. He pushed a manila folder across the scratched metal table. This, he said, won't stop them from trying, but it proves you were authorized. No one fakes Eileen's handwriting too many curls. I opened the folder. Inside was the 2014 access letter, same one Byron handed me, but this copy had something I hadn't seen before. On the lower margin, faint but legible, was a hand-drawn overlay of the radio frequency diagram, channel 31.9, and next to it, in Eileen's unmistakable scrawl, a 7-digit override code. I stared at it. She wrote that herself, I asked. Franklin nodded. It was her initials then, a code we used for temporary relay access during the Ashridge flood project. Gerald Penley flagged it in the permit record but never followed up. He tapped another paper. A memo. Internal. Dated the same week. In Penley's handwriting expressed concern re HOA overreach. Signed under pressure. See Note 3A. Franklin exhaled slow. Gerald knew something was off. He told me as much over whiskey last Christmas. Said he regretted caving. We sat in silence listening to the hum of the HVAC and the occasional thump of file drawers closing somewhere distant. The override links to your ID in the relay system, Franklin continued. It confirms the channel was active under your name, legally, until they decommissioned it on paper. I traced the pencil lines on the floor plan with my finger. There, buried between conduit routes and zoning codes, was a little X at Mulligan's Bend, our shack. This wasn't just an access route, I said. It was a safeguard. Eileen knew it. She wrote it. Franklin leaned back in his chair. So, now comes the question, do you want to play by their rulebook and fade out quietly, or broadcast every damn page of this in front of the HOA meeting? I looked up. You already know which I'll pick. He smiled, but it was more resignation than joy. That evening, back at the shack, I powered up Byron's radio. The room filled with its warm, low hum. I input the override code, pausing between digits like a priest reciting liturgy. The dial clicked. A pause. Then, from the speaker, a sharp beep. The static cleared. Relay node access confirmed. Channel 31.9 active. I exhaled. It was still there. Still ours. After all the rewrites, all the polished maps and memos and silence, something real had endured. Not just in memory, but in frequency. A line had opened across the East Ridge, quiet and visible, but live. I stared at the radio, heart steady. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like coming home. Franklin met me at the diner the next morning. He slid into the booth without ordering, tossed a file onto the table. I've prepped the timeline. Permit dates, access codes, your logs. If she tries to pivot, we'll have redundancy. She will, I said. He folded his hands. Then we go to the meeting. No more hiding. Through the window, I saw the first of the dogwoods blooming white against the parking lot fence, stubborn, soft, and inevitable. I arrived 3 minutes late. The Ashmill Ridge Community Hall was already packed, folding chairs tight against one another's shoulders, brushing knees bumping. Someone had adjusted the thermostat too high. Sweat glistened on the brows of people who hadn't broken a sweat since leaf-raking season. Eileen stood center stage under the flickering ceiling fan, a folder clenched in her French manicured hands. Her blazer was cobalt, the same shade as the HOA logo stitched on the podium drape. Next to her feet, propped like an exhibit in court, sat the emergency access sign, my sign snapped clean in two, its jagged post jutting like a broken rib. "I know this may be difficult for some of you to hear," she said, voice pitched with drama. "But when safety is at stake, we must confront uncomfortable truths." Phones were out, recording, live. I walked in as she held up a printout. "This," she declared, "is a series of emails we obtained through anonymous tips. They suggest that Mr. Reynold York, yes, our former emergency liaison, has been using outdated equipment to interfere with HOA communications." A murmur rolled through the room. "Furthermore," she went on, "we have concerns regarding his mental state. He's refused inspection, refused recertification, and, quite frankly, some of you have expressed concerns privately. Rescue work leaves scars. We sympathize, but we must also protect our community." She was good. Her tone hit every note: sympathy, concern, leadership, like she'd practiced in front of a mirror for hours. Then she stepped behind the podium and kicked the sign hard, the splintered wood echoing against the tile. "This symbol," she said, "does not represent our future. It represents disorder, obstruction, misuse of property." More phones up. A few people nodded, others watched without blinking. I didn't say a word. I walked to the table where the HOA board sat. Rue gave me a slight nod. Maudine Bell, retired teacher and lifelong firebrand, stared at Eileen with a knitted brow. Eileen glanced over. A flicker of something surprised annoyance crossed her face. I pulled out a folded sheet of paper and walked to the microphone. "My name is Reynold York," I said, voice steady. "I've lived in this community for 17 years. Before that, I coordinated emergency relay systems for Carson County. Today, I'd like to read from a document signed in May 2014. I unfolded the page. The paper crackled slightly. I let the sound linger. "Authorization Perimeter Access. Emergency Route Gate B. Reynold York. Signed, Eileen Casterbridge, HOA President." Silence fell like a curtain. "Additionally," I continued, "the emergency map you replaced last month was installed under this authorization in coordination with the county's safety code following the Ashridge flood remediation. Your current map omits 2 access routes, including the only viable path for service vehicles during a ridge slide." A beat. Then another. Eileen stepped forward, lips parted. "That document is out of context. We've updated our protocols since then." "Without a vote?" Maudine Bell asked from the third row. Eileen turned sharply. "Maudine, please, we're trying to maintain order." "I am too," Maudine replied, arms folded. Eileen's cheeks flushed. She reached for her phone, tapped the screen, and held it up to the mic. "I'm calling 911, she said loud enough for every corner of the room. "Right now. This is a safety issue." She pressed the speaker icon. It rang. Once, twice, then came the voice. 911, Carson Command. Byron speaking. I didn't move. Eileen froze. Byron's voice was calm, steady, unmistakable. "This line is monitored and recorded. State your emergency." Eileen fumbled with the phone. Hung up. From the back, someone let out a short, stunned laugh. It wasn't cruel, just surprised, like air escaping a balloon. Maudine turned her head. "Did she just—" "She did," Rue said quietly beside her. Eileen tried to gather herself, but the spell had cracked. Her folder slid from the podium edge pages, spilling like leaves. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. Byron's voice, lived through the phone, had done more than I ever could with facts and signatures. The room shifted. I could feel it like a fault line adjusting. People weren't standing up yet, but they were leaning, listening. Eileen blinked, her manicured hand still clutching the phone like it might bite her. "Byron," she said. Voice thin. The room didn't breathe. The live stream feed climbed past 400 viewers, the red dot pulsing in the top corner of the screen behind her. From the speakers, Byron's voice came clear and calm. "This is Carson County Emergency Command. Identify the nature of your emergency and your authorization code." He might as well have asked her for oxygen on Mars. Eileen stammered, lips parting with no words to fill the space. I'm reporting a disruption," she managed, then looked to the crowd like someone expecting applause. Byron didn't answer immediately. The silence buzzed louder than his words. Finally, authorization code. She didn't have one. Everyone knew it now, especially her. From the back, Maudine leaned forward, whispered just loud enough, "There's no coming back from this." I saw Franklin Oak step into the room, crisp gray blazer, a thick manila folder in hand. He moved with unhurried gravity like the tide. "Eileen Casterbridge," Byron said. "Per your call, this line is now under county review. Please remain where you are. You are not under arrest. Yet." The yet wasn't a threat. It was punctuation. Byron never bluffed. Eileen lowered the phone like it weighed more than she could hold. Franklin stepped to the front row, handed the folder to the HOA vice chair. "Financial audit, 6 months," he said. "Signatures, transfers, duplicate budgets. And one unaccounted discretionary fund routed to a personal LLC connected to the HOA president." Eileen took a step back. Someone gasped, maybe Maudine, maybe Rue. I didn't look. The vice chair's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. This isn't standard procedure," she muttered. "No," Franklin said, "but it's signed." 2 county investigators, plainclothes, quietly efficient, stepped up from the second row where they'd blended like wallpaper. They didn't touch Eileen. They didn't have to. They simply flanked the podium. Eileen's knees buckled slightly, but she didn't fall. Her voice, when it came, was a ghost of the one that had called me unstable. "You're humiliating me." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "No, Eileen." "You did that all by yourself." Someone's phone beeped with a news alert. "HOA board meeting, trending local. 13,000 viewers." Eileen stepped away from the mic. Her eyes met mine. There was no anger left, only a wide, flickering disbelief, like she'd just seen the structure of her life tilt 30 degrees sideways and realized the furniture would never sit flat again. Franklin turned to me. "You want to file a complaint or make a statement?" I thought about that. I really did. But I looked around the room, people leaning forward, eyes lit by screens and truth, and I knew words would only muddy what had already spoken for itself. "I think I said the system spoke." The live stream crackled as if to agree. No cheers, no applause, just the quiet shift of air when a room exhales all at once. Rue nudged me. He held up his phone, smirking. "You're trending, Reynold," he said. "HOA hero. 13,000 and counting." I didn't smile. Not quite, but I nodded. Once, like a man closing a cabinet door that had been hanging open for years. Eileen was gone. Just like that. But the shadow of her regime didn't vanish with her nameplate. In the weeks that followed the meeting, something quiet began to uncoil like a spring left tense for too long. It didn't snap back. It just unspooled slow and deliberate, releasing truths no one had asked for out loud. Maudine invited me and Rue to the church basement that first Saturday in May. There were lemonade pitchers sweating on the plastic tables, folding chairs clattering, and a stack of old cardboard file boxes labeled HOA MISC. She set one of the boxes down with a thud. "Found these in the attic. Don't ask why I kept them. Maybe I just knew one day someone would care." Inside was a ledger, yellowed pages hand-tabbed with duct tape. One column read, "Dues Adjustments." Besides certain names, there were handwritten notes, non-payable hostile pending HOA action, and more than one marked encouraged relocation. "They told us it was standard accounting," Maudine muttered. But I knew then, and I know now, this was punishment. A man I vaguely remembered from block parties, Ted, something heavyset and soft-spoken, stood up and told how his aunt sold her house under pressure after being fined weekly for a lawn height discrepancy. Another woman, Nora, mentioned threats about her daughter's non-compliant swing set. I listened, mostly. Let them speak it out like steam from a long-sealed valve. Franklin arrived later, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. "Most HOAs aren't built to handle justice," he said. "But nothing's stopping us from forming something new. A resident council. No enforcement rights, just transparency. Advocacy." Maudine raised her hand like it was church again. "And if someone wants to help but doesn't want the title, we need those people most," I said. That got a few smiles. Rue grinned and passed out slips of paper. "Write what you want this place to feel like. Don't worry about what it's been." By late afternoon, someone proposed calling it the Community Watch and Safety Relay. Maudine's church offered the basement every third Saturday. No rent, just respect. I walked out to the emergency shed behind the hall before sundown. It still smelled like dry rope and metal dust. The door hinges moaned when I opened them, but the latch was whole now. The sign I'd rebuilt private property. Emergency access only was freshly mounted, nailed level. Rue had helped me reinstall it the night before. A tall, nervous high schooler approached me. Caleb, I remembered. He rubbed his hands together like he was unsure whether to salute or shake mine. I was wondering, he said, if you'd teach us how to use the relay. You know, in case we ever need it. I pulled the original key from my pocket, held it out. He hesitated, then took it with both hands. Will you train us? He asked. I nodded once. That was enough. From behind me, Rue tapped my shoulder. He nodded toward the hills. Same channel still works. I looked out at the ridge, the trees shimmering in the golden hush of spring evening. The old frequency still hummed quietly in the back of my head. Always did I said. 1 year later, we stood at the edge of Ashmill Ridge again. The rebuilt trailhead gleamed under the morning sun bolts sunk deep into wood still rich with the scent of fresh pine. There was no podium, just a folding table with paper cups, a clipboard, and a speaker crackling faintly on channel 31.9. The field behind us had filled slowly, families, kids in matching relay team shirts, old-timers who hadn't set foot near the forest in years. They came not for a spectacle, but to witness something quieter repair, maybe. Or readiness. I kept to the side hands in my jacket pockets. I'd worn the old uniform jacket without really thinking about it. The patch had faded threadbare around the edges. Still, a couple of people nodded as they passed me half memory, half thanks. Maudine opened the morning with a short word of blessing. No talk of Eileen. No rehashing. Just, we're glad you're here, let's stay ready. Caleb followed. Taller now, shoulders beginning to square. He held the same key I'd handed him a year before tied to a blue lanyard. He spoke without notes. Byron once told me the signal isn't the radio. It's us. We carry it. Whether someone's listening or not. There wasn't applause so much as a collective breath, one of those quiet agreements people make without needing to say so. The new Community Safety Center stood 20 yards off, repurposed from the old Parks and Trails shed. A framed photo hung just inside me, Byron, 3 others from the old relay crew. We weren't smiling in it, just standing hands folded radios at our belts. It felt right. The kids lined up to test the radios. Each one had a laminated instruction card. Channel 31.9 chirped back to every call with a steady, "Copy received. Stay safe." A girl in a ponytail, maybe 9 years old, tugged my sleeve. "Did ghosts ever live in the Radio Shack?" I chuckled. "Only when we stopped using it. They don't like silence." She grinned, then ran off to try the scanner. Byron didn't make it today. His knees weren't what they used to be, but he sent a note I'd read later. Just seeing his handwriting on the envelope made something settle in my chest, like the system still had hands holding it steady. Maudine passed me a small wooden box around noon. "Thought you should be the one to seal it." Inside was the radio key, the original. I hadn't realized Caleb had kept it so clean, still had the burn mark from Byron's old soldering iron. I wrote on a strip of tape for next watch, stuck it to the top, closed the lid, and handed it back. No ceremony, no plaque. That was the point. I stepped away from the table, walked toward the edge of the clearing where the pines thinned into sky. Behind me, the speaker crackled again. "Ashmill." "Ready," a young voice said. "No current incidents, but we're listening." I didn't look back, just kept walking. The signal, after all, was never the point. What mattered was that someone was always ready to hear it. The last light that afternoon caught on the new sign smooth level its bolts tight like a promise kept. Somewhere behind me the relay clicked to life, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I've learned that not all justice comes with sirens or gavels. Sometimes it comes through patience in systems held together by quiet hands. And sometimes bridges don't collapse, they're just waiting for the right time to be walked again. If you've ever rebuilt something others gave up on, a home, a voice, a second chance, then you already know that signal still lives in you. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Drop your story below, or just let us know you're listening. She ripped the emergency access only sign clean off the post right as I was restoring the rescue map for the kids' safety walk. Claimed I was trespassing, then called 911, without realizing the voice on the other end was mine. "Name's Reynolds. I used to run the county's emergency dispatch." The clipboard she shoved aside still had her signature from 2014. She just never looked down. "Ever seen someone pull rank in the wrong room? Tell me how it ended."